Hello there, and welcome to the weekly Outside Views magazine on the politics of the European Union, the EU. Significantly more illegal border crossings have recently been counted across several countries in the Western Balkans, and now the EU wants to react. According to the will of the EU Commission, illegal migration via the Western Balkans into the European Union is to be curbed with an action plan. Our goal is to reduce the numbers through these coordinated measures, said EU Commission Vice President Margaritis Skinas on Monday. Significantly more people had recently come to the EU via Serbia, Albania, and the other Western Balkan countries. According to the EU Border Protection Agency Frontex, 22,300 illegal border crossings were counted in October alone. That's almost 3 times as many as in the same period last year. The action plan that has now been presented provides, among other things, for a significant increase in border checks along the Western Balkans route, also with the help of the EU Border Protection Force Frontex. In addition, returns of rejected asylum seekers are to be accelerated, and at the same time, the asylum system of the Balkan states is to be strengthened. Anyone arriving irregularly has to be registered, otherwise our system won't work properly, said EU Home Affairs Commissioner Ylva Johansson. Applications are to be processed more quickly in the future, and the possibilities for accommodating those seeking protection are to be improved. With the help of the EU police authority Europol, the fight against the smuggling of migrants across national borders is to be stepped up. The EU also keeps up the pressure on the Balkan countries to align their visa policies with those of the European Union. Most recently, Serbia had already lifted the visa exemption for travelers from Tunisia and Burundi. According to the EU Commission, other states should follow. This should also be an issue at the EU Western Balkans summit that was planned this week, and it was an issue in the Albanian capital of Tirana. The EU and Japan want to work more closely together in the production and trade of climate-friendly hydrogen. EU Energy Commissioner Kadri Simpson and Japan's Economy Minister Yasutoshi Nishimura signed a cooperation agreement last Friday. The aim is to produce low CO2 and climate-neutral hydrogen cheaply, and also to cooperate in the areas of transport, storage, and the use of the energy source, according to a statement. Hydrogen is considered climate-friendly when it is produced using electricity from renewable energies such as wind or solar power. Rules are currently being negotiated in the EU to ramp up the hydrogen economy in order to gradually replace natural gas, for example. The EU and Japan now want to work together on developing rules, common standards, and also on state aid in this area. In addition, companies or authorities should cooperate more closely in training and further education. So-called green hydrogen produced with green electricity should help in the future to do without fossil fuels in industrial production. In competition with countries like Russia and China, the European Union is trying to gain more influence in the Western Balkans with financial aid worth billions. Concrete commitments to the 6 states in their aspirations to join the EU were not made at the joint summit on Tuesday in the Albanian capital of Tirana. In a statement, the heads of state and government of the EU countries confirmed their unrestricted and unequivocal commitment to the prospect of EU membership for Albania, Serbia, North Macedonia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Montenegro, and Kosovo. At the same time, however, they pointed out that rapid progress could only be made on the basis of credible reforms. Support for European foreign and security policy, including sanctions against Russia, was mentioned in the declaration as a basic prerequisite for further rapprochement. This particularly addressed Serbia, which has so far not supported the EU's punitive measures because of the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, but they are expected to do so. In Tirana, however, EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen spoke of new impetus in the accession process and referred to the increasing frequency of joint meetings. EU Council President Charles Michel emphasized how important progress in the accession efforts is also for the EU. I am absolutely convinced that the future of our children with the best Western Balkans in the EU will be safer and more prosperous, said the Belgian. He was also alluding to the fact that the Western Balkans are located in the middle of the EU and border on member states such as Bulgaria, Romania, Croatia, and Hungary. In principle, all 6 Balkan countries are striving for EU membership, but they are at different stages in the process. In recent years, the rapprochement has also stalled due to internal EU disputes. The frustration of the Balkan states is sometimes great, especially since Ukraine and Moldova were made candidate countries at record speed in June as a result of the Russian war of aggression. For the EU, on the other hand, Russia's war has shown, above all, that there should be no both and for countries like Serbia. You have to decide which side you are on, von der Leyen said in Tirana. On the side of democracy, that's the European Union, your friend and partner, or do you want to take a different path? Russia and China try to exert influence in the region. However, it is the EU that is the largest investor and closest partner of the Western Balkans. The issue of migration is also important for the EU. As I mentioned earlier in this video, most recently significantly more illegal border crossings via the Western Balkans into the EU were counted. As I said, 22,300 in October. And the EU is therefore calling on the Balkan states to align their visa policies with those of the European Union. So far, people from India have been able to travel to Serbia without a visa, from where they recently increasingly traveled to the EU and applied for asylum there. Serbia has already lifted the visa waiver for Tunisia and Burundi, and India is expected to follow next year. But the EU expects more efforts from Serbia and the other countries, for example in the fight against smuggler gangs. In the event that the countries do not adapt their visa policies, there have even been threats of suspending the current visa-free regime with the EU. The EU is also putting pressure on the tense relationship between Serbia and Kosovo. At the summit, the EU presented a new proposal to normalize relations. According to diplomats, it provides that Serbia does not have to recognize the independence of Kosovo, but should accept it. Specifically, this should mean in particular that Belgrade will no longer block Kosovo's membership in international organizations. In return, Serbia could receive considerable financial and economic aid from the EU. The EU has been trying for years to help clarify the relationship between the two neighbors. Kosovo, which is now almost exclusively inhabited by Albanians, split from Serbia in 1999 with the help of NATO and declared its independence in 2008. More than 100 countries, including my home Germany, recognizes independence. Others, such as Serbia, Russia and China, but also 5 EU countries, do not. Money is the main incentive for the rocky road to EU rapprochement. An economic and investment offensive that has already been launched envisages providing up to 9 billion euros in grants in the coming years. These should then mobilize an additional 20 billion euros in investments. Recently, another billion euros were made available to mitigate the consequences of the Russian war against Ukraine. The money can be used, for example, to support families and companies that are suffering from the sharp rise in energy prices. However, the countries cannot expect any concessions in the EU accession process. This should remain strictly performance-based. However, concrete advantages of the rapprochement should be felt much earlier, also for EU citizens. For example, an agreement was signed on the sidelines of the summit that should result in future trips to or through the Western Balkan countries not incurring such high additional costs for cell phone use. By 2027 at the latest, roaming charges should be completely eliminated. Because of the dispute over the possible freezing of EU billions for Hungary, the country is blocking extensive financial aid for war-torn Ukraine. It is regrettable that we did not make a decision today about the indispensable financial aid for Ukraine, said German Federal Finance Minister Christian Lindner after a meeting with his EU colleagues in Brussels on Tuesday. Hungary is responsible for that, Lindner said. A week before, the EU Commission recommended only releasing corona aid and other funding for Hungary if the right-wing populist government of Prime Minister Viktor Orban completely implemented promises to uphold the rule of law. In total, it's about 13.3 billion euros. Against this background, Hungary has blocked the decision on aid to Ukraine, which must be taken unanimously. The international minimum tax on which the EU states had actually already agreed, together with around 130 other countries, was also taken off the agenda because of Hungarian resistance. The adoption of the package now depends on the development of the measures Hungary takes to protect the EU budget, said Czech Finance Minister Zbyněk Stanjura, who chaired the talks. If necessary, a solution should be sought to provide Ukraine with the money without Hungary. And German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said on Tuesday on the sidelines of the EU Western Balkans summit in Tirana, "I would like all 27 member states of the European Union to support the proposal. That's important for Ukraine." And he is confident that this will succeed. Because there is a way that could resolve the impasse. The EU Commission should now evaluate Hungary's anti-corruption measures a second time before the EU states make their decision on freezing the billions. The report should be available by the end of this week when I'm filming this, but I haven't seen it yet. Stanjura hopes that a compromise on the various measures can be found within a few days. Then the finance ministers could decide on all measures by the end of the year at the latest. And I absolutely expected this to happen because Hungary is just looking at Hungary under this government. And unfortunately, they will use others and will hold others hostage to get whatever they want, but it won't work with the EU. For years, the EU Commission has accused Hungary of undermining EU standards and fundamental values. The Commission's proposals involve around 7.5 billion euros from the community budget that are to be frozen. And in addition, corona aid of over 5.8 billion euros should only be paid out if Budapest has reached certain milestones in the area of the rule of law. The EU states must agree to both recommendations. The Commission recently found that Hungary had carried out a number of reforms, but key aspects had not been adequately implemented. Significant steps are still needed to eliminate remaining risks to the EU budget in Hungary. Specifically, there are fears that EU funds will not be used for the intended purposes due to corruption. Negotiators from the European Parliament and EU states have agreed on a law to protect the Amazon rainforest and other forests. In the future, the import of numerous products into the EU will be banned if forests have been cut down, as the two institutions announced on Tuesday night. The EU is a big consumer and trader of commodities that contribute significantly to deforestation, such as beef, cocoa, soy, and timber, said Czech Environment Minister Marian Jurečka. The country will hold the regularly rotating presidency among the EU countries until the end of the year still. The new regulations also apply to goods that contain the listed raw materials, are produced from them, or are used for animal feed and production. Leather, chocolate, and furniture are mentioned as examples. In the negotiations, the MEPs pushed through that the rules also include rubber, charcoal, and printed paper products, provided they were produced on cultivated areas that were deforested after December 2020, as the EU Parliament announced. In 2 years, it will be checked whether other goods need to be included. And that concludes this week's magazine on EU politics. I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.